3 American service members have been killed. Central Command reporting they died in an attack on Kuwait, at least 5 others wounded. Late today, President Trump boarding Air Force One. He made his first comments about the American deaths, calling them, quote, true American patriots, vowing to avenge their deaths and saying, quote, sadly, there will likely be more before it ends. The president today saying hundreds of targets have been hit by the U.S. and Israel, including defense systems, Revolutionary Guard facilities, and 9.
The United States has confirmed the first American combat fatalities in the expanding military confrontation with Iran. 3 U.S. service members were killed in an Iranian attack in Kuwait, with at least 5 others seriously wounded. Central Command reports the strike occurred late in the day as Iranian forces intensified retaliation against U.S. and allied targets across the region. The deaths mark a significant escalation, transforming what had been a large-scale strike campaign into a conflict with confirmed American casualties. President Trump publicly acknowledged the losses while boarding Air Force One, calling the fallen true American patriots and vowing to avenge their deaths. He warned that additional casualties are likely as operations continue. The administration has framed the campaign as a necessary response to strategic threats posed by Iran's leadership and military infrastructure. However, the confirmation of U.S. fatalities shifts the political and military stakes, signaling that American personnel are now directly exposed in an active regional war zone. The loss of life in Kuwait underscores the vulnerability of U.S. bases positioned across the Middle East, many within range of Iranian missiles and proxy forces. Military analysts note that once American casualties occur, operational tempo and strategic posture often shift, either toward deterrence escalation or broader force protection deployments. The Pentagon has not yet detailed specific defensive adjustments, but force readiness across regional installations is now under heightened scrutiny.
Of the massive US-Israeli war on Iran, as Iran retaliates for the assassination of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. The US confirming 3 American service members were killed in action, 5 more seriously wounded. US officials telling ABC News they were killed in an Iranian attack in Kuwait. Late today, President Trump releasing a new video from Mar-a-Lago responding to those deaths, warning there'll likely be more.
As one nation, we grieve for the true American patriots who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, even as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives.
The president's response emphasized resolve and continuity of mission. In remarks delivered from Mar-a-Lago and later reinforced during travel, he stated that combat operations would proceed in full force until U.S. objectives are achieved. He also indicated that the broader campaign, referred to as Operation Epic Fury, could extend for weeks. The confirmation that American personnel were killed during Iranian retaliation adds urgency to both military planning and diplomatic positioning. More than 1,000 targets inside Iran have reportedly been struck since operations began, including ballistic missile facilities, naval assets, and Revolutionary Guard infrastructure. Officials claim multiple Iranian naval vessels were destroyed. Despite these assertions of tactical success, the attack in Kuwait demonstrates Iran's retained capability to strike U.S. positions beyond its borders. The administration now faces dual pressures, maintaining operational momentum while preventing wider regional destabilization. With U.S. forces stationed in multiple Gulf nations, each installation becomes a potential flashpoint. The president's warning that more casualties may occur reflects an acknowledgement that the conflict has entered a sustained phase rather than a limited strike window. The deaths of the 3 service members represent not only a tactical loss, but a defining moment in the trajectory of this military confrontation.
To topple the Iranian regime. As new video emerges at the moment Ayatollah Khamenei's compound was hit. A source telling ABC News the CIA had been tracking the Supreme Leader for months, down to his daily routine. An Israeli source briefed on the joint strike telling us Israeli intelligence discovered that Khamenei spent quite a lot of time above ground in his offices and not in his bunker. When the US learned the Supreme Leader would be meeting with top Iranian officials in Tehran on Saturday, the source says the time...
In a development with profound geopolitical consequences, a joint U.S.-Israeli operation killed Iran's Supreme Leader along with more than 40 senior Iranian officials and military commanders. Intelligence sources indicate that the CIA had tracked the Supreme Leader's movements for months, closely monitoring daily routines and patterns. According to officials briefed on the strike, The timing was accelerated after confirmation that he would be meeting with top Iranian leadership above ground in Tehran. The strike reportedly occurred within minutes of initiation, targeting not only the supreme leader but also the head of Iran's armed forces, the defense minister, and several senior commanders. Such a decapitation strategy aims to disrupt centralized command and control, potentially degrading coordinated military responses. Analysts note that removing leadership at this scale is rare and carries both strategic opportunity and long-term unpredictability. The elimination of Iran's highest authority represents a historic rupture in the Islamic Republic's governing structure. Beyond military implications, the supreme leader serves as the ultimate political and religious authority. His death introduces constitutional procedures for succession while raising questions about stability within Iran's power centers. Intelligence officials suggest that the rapid execution of the strike reflected both precision targeting and a calculation that delaying action risked losing the opportunity entirely.
Of attacks.
All in a matter of literally minutes. Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead. This wretched and vile man had the blood of hundreds and even thousands of Americans on his hands and was responsible for the slaughter of countless thousands of innocent people all across.
The scale of leadership losses extends beyond a single figure. Reports confirm that more than 40 high-ranking leaders were killed in the opening wave. Military experts indicate that losing that concentration of command authority simultaneously can leave units operating without centralized direction. Even if replacements are quickly appointed, interim confusion can affect operational coherence. Iranian officials insist that military capability remains intact and that leadership replacements can be installed swiftly. Historically, the Islamic Republic has demonstrated resilience after targeted assassinations. However, the breadth of this operation appears unprecedented. The coordinated targeting of senior officials suggests extensive intelligence penetration and operational synchronization between U.S. and Israeli forces. Strategically, decapitation strikes aim to compress decision-making cycles and create a temporary imbalance. Yet such actions also carry escalation risks, particularly if surviving leadership seeks rapid retaliation to demonstrate continuity and strength. The assassination of the supreme leader shifts the conflict beyond conventional military engagement into regime-level destabilization. Whether this produces deterrence, fragmentation, or intensified retaliation remains a central strategic question now confronting policymakers.
Spiraling conflict. Iranian missiles and drones have now rained down on 9 countries across the Middle East. Among them, Tehran lashing out at Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, all US allies hosting American bases. Civilians fleeing for safety now caught in the middle. The luxury Fairmont Hotel in Dubai struck, a major commercial and transit hub. The world's biggest airport, Dubai, on lockdown after being targeted multiple times.
Iran's retaliation expanded rapidly across the Middle East, with missiles and drones launched at targets in at least 9 countries. Among those impacted were Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates, nations hosting American bases or aligned closely with U.S. security frameworks. Airports in Dubai and Kuwait were struck, with commercial aviation operations disrupted and terminals affected. The scale of the response indicates a coordinated regional strategy rather than isolated counterstrikes. By targeting multiple countries simultaneously, Iran appears to be signaling both capability and reach. Civilian infrastructure, including major transit hubs, was placed at risk. The temporary lockdown of Dubai's airport, one of the busiest international transit centers in the world, demonstrates the broader economic ripple effects of the conflict. U.S. embassies across the region were placed on high alert, and Americans in several countries reported being stranded due to flight suspensions. The State Department issued advisories urging vigilance worldwide. Analysts describe this phase as a widening perimeter conflict, in which allied nations hosting U.S. forces become immediate targets of retaliatory pressure.
Had a very long night, a lot of explosions, a lot of warnings, a lot of jet sounds.
Many Americans in the region stranded. Christy Elmer and her partner Matt were in Dubai for work. Now they're not sure when they can return to their New Hampshire home.
Hoping that the defense systems, the layered defense systems keep working.
US embassies a target too. Growing clashes at a consulate in Karachi to the Green Zone in Baghdad. Tens of thousands of embassy staff and military personnel on high alert. The State Department also urging Americans.
Israel, Iranian missiles penetrated air defense systems and struck near Jerusalem, killing at least 9 people. Emergency crews conducted search and rescue operations amid structural destruction and scattered debris. The strike underscored that even advanced defensive systems are not impermeable under sustained assault. The regional spread of missile and drone attacks suggests that Iran is employing both direct launches and possibly proxy networks. By dispersing retaliation across multiple fronts, Tehran complicates defensive coordination and stretches Allied response capacity. The targeting of civilian-adjacent areas intensifies public safety concerns and raises the risk of further escalation if civilian casualties mount. From a military standpoint, Iran's ability to conduct multi-country strikes after losing significant leadership indicates pre-existing operational planning and delegated authority structures. Even amid command disruption, retaliatory capability remains functional. The regional dimension transforms the conflict from a bilateral confrontation into a broader Middle Eastern security crisis, with multiple sovereign states directly impacted within hours of the initial decapitation strike.
Regime shaken to its core. More than 40 of its leaders dead in strikes carried out with astonishing speed and exquisite intelligence. Within minutes of the opening strikes, not only was Iran's supreme leader killed, but the head of Iran's armed forces, the defense minister, and 7 senior military leaders, along with dozens more commanders. The strikes have prompted celebrations in the streets and in the privacy of Iran.
The assassination of the supreme leader triggered a volatile mix of public mourning, anger, and political uncertainty. Tens of thousands gathered in Tehran and other cities, with large crowds denouncing the United States and Israel. Simultaneously, reports indicate that some citizens privately expressed hope for political change. This dual reaction reflects long-standing internal divisions within Iranian society. More than 40 senior leaders were confirmed dead, including top military commanders. Such concentrated losses at the apex of power leave institutional gaps that must be filled rapidly to maintain state continuity. Under Iran's constitution, an interim leadership council assumes temporary authority until the Assembly of Experts appoints a new supreme leader. Officials suggest that selection could occur within days. The regime's ability to project stability during this transition will be closely monitored both domestically and internationally. Leadership succession in Iran is not merely ceremonial. It defines strategic direction, foreign policy posture, and military doctrine. The sudden removal of the country's highest authority places immense pressure on remaining institutions to demonstrate control and cohesion.
President in the strikes, but tonight he is with an interim leadership council. According to Iran's constitution, the council will remain in place until a new supreme leader is chosen by the so-called Assembly of Experts, and that could be.
Iran's president survived the strikes and is now operating alongside an interim council. The constitutional process for appointing a new supreme leader introduces procedural structure, but it does not eliminate factional competition behind the scenes. Political observers note that internal power centers, including clerical authorities, military leadership remnants, and political elites, may influence the outcome. The foreign minister has publicly asserted that military capability remains unchanged despite leadership losses. However, external analysts argue that simultaneous removal of top command figures inevitably affects coordination, at least temporarily. How quickly replacements are confirmed and integrated will shape Iran's capacity to sustain organized retaliation. The internal shockwaves extend beyond immediate governance. Financial markets, public sentiment, and regional alliances all respond to perceived stability or instability in Tehran. If succession proceeds swiftly and cohesively, the regime may project resilience. If internal divisions surface, adversaries could interpret that as strategic vulnerability. The coming days will determine whether Iran's leadership transition reinforces continuity or accelerates structural change within the Islamic Republic.
Wave heading back to Washington after launching a new war with Iran. He has yet to make a full-throated case for war to explain why Iran presented an imminent threat to the United States. Today, he called America's mission, quote, the duty and burden of a free people.
We're undertaking this massive operation not merely to ensure security for our own time and place, but for our children and their children, just as our ancestors have done for us many, many years ago. This is the duty
President Trump is signaling that this military campaign may extend well beyond an initial strike window. In remarks delivered as he returned to Washington, he described the operation as the duty and burden of a free people, framing the conflict as both strategic necessity and long-term security investment. He has not yet delivered a comprehensive address outlining specific evidence of an imminent threat, but administration officials maintain that intelligence assessments justified the action. The president indicated that the operation could last as long as 4 weeks. That timeline suggests sustained air and strategic strikes rather than a short-duration punitive response. U.S. forces have reportedly hit more than 1,000 targets, including missile facilities and naval assets. The operational scale implies significant logistical coordination and continued force projection in the region. At the same time, the president revealed that Iran has expressed interest in reopening talks. He stated that he has agreed to engage in discussions, though he did not specify with whom negotiations would occur. That acknowledgement raises a central question: whether military pressure is intended to compel diplomatic concessions or whether regime-level destabilization remains the broader objective. The dual track of sustained strikes and potential talks reflects a strategy combining coercive force with conditional diplomacy.
And the burden of a free people.
Trump spent the weekend huddling behind closed doors with his closest advisors, working the phones with world leaders, and on 2 occasions slipping out to mingle with guests at Mar-a-Lago fundraisers. This video obtained by the Daily Mail.
The president also warned that additional casualties are likely before the conflict concludes. That statement reflects recognition that retaliation cycles may continue even as diplomatic channels are explored. Once active hostilities expand across multiple countries, de-escalation becomes increasingly complex. Engaging in talks while combat operations continue is not unprecedented, but it introduces strategic ambiguity. If Iranian leadership structures are in transition, identifying legitimate negotiating counterparts may prove difficult. The president's remarks suggest that at least some figures within Iran's hierarchy remain positioned to communicate. A prolonged operation carries implications beyond the battlefield. Sustained deployments increase strain on military resources, alliance coordination, and domestic political debate. The administration will likely face ongoing scrutiny over objectives, exit strategy, and proportionality. Whether negotiations materialize or not, the declared 4-week horizon signals that policymakers are preparing for a campaign measured in weeks rather than days. The balance between military escalation and diplomatic outreach will shape the trajectory of this conflict in the immediate term.
Tonight, just hours after the U.S. attack on Iran and the killing of its supreme leader, the horrific and deadly scene outside of a bar in Austin, Texas. A gunman opening fire on more than a dozen people.
Oh my God!
Law enforcement sources say this image obtained by Fox News is the suspect, dressed in a hooded sweatshirt bearing the words, "Property of Allah." Sources identifying the alleged gunman as Injaga Junya, a 53-year-old natural.
Just hours after news broke of the strike that killed Iran's supreme leader, a deadly shooting unfolded in Austin, Texas. A gunman opened fire outside a bar shortly before 2 a.m., striking more than a dozen people. 2 victims died at the scene, and several others were transported to hospitals in critical condition. Law enforcement officials state that the suspect was later shot and killed by police, ending the attack. Authorities are investigating whether the shooting may have been influenced by international events. Law enforcement sources report that the suspect was wearing clothing bearing religious messaging and that early reports referenced Iran. The FBI is examining whether there was any nexus to terrorism or ideological motivation linked to developments overseas. While officials have not confirmed a definitive motive, the timing has intensified scrutiny. When high-profile international conflicts unfold, domestic security agencies often elevate alert levels due to potential retaliatory or copycat actions. The Austin incident underscores the vulnerability of public spaces and the speed with which violence can erupt. Investigators are working to determine whether the suspect acted alone and whether any communications indicate broader coordination.
Mere minutes. A man in an SUV using a pistol to randomly fire at people outside the club just before 2 a.m. Sunday. In seconds, the suspect seen here out on the street, now with a rifle firing away. 3 victims transported to local hospitals in critical condition, 2 dying at the scene. The gunman shot dead by police, ending the melee.
We have families that are at hospital.
The attack lasted only minutes, but the consequences were immediate and severe. Witness accounts describe rapid gunfire and chaos as victims attempted to flee. Local hospitals mobilized emergency response protocols, and families gathered awaiting updates on loved ones. Federal and local authorities are now reviewing digital evidence, vehicle contents, and the suspect's background. Identifying motive is critical not only for accountability but also for assessing broader threat patterns. If investigators determine ideological influence tied to international developments, security posture adjustments could follow nationwide. This incident highlights the intersection between global conflict and domestic safety. Even without confirmed coordination, symbolic alignment with foreign events can amplify tensions. Law enforcement agencies across the country remain vigilant, particularly during periods of heightened geopolitical volatility. The Austin shooting adds a domestic security dimension to an already expanding international crisis.
Hill tonight, Rachel.
Well, David, Democrats and a handful of Republicans are demanding a vote in Congress this week on a war powers resolution that would require President Trump to get congressional approval before ordering any additional military action in Iran. Republican leadership is urging their members to vote against it. Democrats say this is a war of choice, not...
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are confronting the constitutional implications of the expanding conflict. Democrats and a small group of Republicans are demanding a vote on a war powers resolution that would require the president to seek congressional authorization before ordering additional military action against Iran. Supporters argue that sustained hostilities require explicit legislative approval. The war powers framework was designed to balance executive authority as commander-in-chief with Congress's constitutional role in declaring war. Critics of the administration contend that the current operation constitutes a war of choice rather than immediate necessity. They argue that absent imminent threat evidence, congressional oversight is essential. Republican leadership, however, is urging members to oppose the resolution. With Republicans holding the majority in Congress and the president retaining veto authority, the measure faces significant obstacles. Nonetheless, the debate signals mounting political scrutiny. As military operations continue and casualties rise, congressional engagement may intensify, particularly if the timeline extends beyond initial projections.
Necessity, but it is Republicans that have the majority here in Congress, and it is President Trump that has veto power, which means this is likely not going anywhere, David.
Legislative debate reflects broader national questions about scope and accountability. Even if the resolution does not advance, the discussion itself shapes public understanding of executive authority during crisis. Lawmakers are expected to press for classified briefings detailing intelligence assessments and strategic objectives. Historically, prolonged military engagements without formal authorization have prompted renewed scrutiny of war powers limits. The coming days may determine whether bipartisan consensus emerges around oversight measures or whether political divisions deepen. For now, the administration retains operational authority, but congressional voices signal that sustained conflict will not proceed without debate. The war powers discussion underscores that while battles may occur overseas, constitutional tensions unfold domestically in parallel.
Hormuz. At least 3 ships coming under attack. 2 were hit. It's not clear if they were intentionally targeted. About 20% of the world's oil and gas passed through the strait. The strikes on Iran expected to cause a surge in oil prices when the markets open. They're spiking about...
Iran has issued warnings to oil tankers transiting the Strait of Hormuz, a critical maritime corridor through which approximately 20% of the world's oil and gas supply passes. At least 3 vessels have come under attack, with 2 confirmed hits. It remains unclear whether those ships were intentionally targeted or caught amid broader hostilities. Any sustained disruption in the strait would have immediate global economic consequences. Energy markets reacted quickly, with oil prices rising sharply in early trading and U.S. stock futures declining. Even the perception of instability in the corridor can trigger volatility, as traders anticipate potential supply constraints. The Strait of Hormuz has long been viewed as a strategic choke point. Military confrontation in its vicinity increases the risk of miscalculation involving commercial shipping, naval patrols, and regional actors. Insurance rates for shipping traffic may rise, and rerouting vessels would extend transit times and costs. Energy importing nations are closely monitoring developments, given the corridor's central role in global supply chains.
11% higher in U.S. trading. Dow futures are down.
The threat to maritime traffic adds
tonight.
a financial dimension to the conflict. Oil price spikes affect transportation, manufacturing, and consumer costs worldwide. A sustained increase could influence inflation metrics and economic growth projections. Markets often respond not only to actual supply disruption but to perceived risk. Naval forces operating in the region may increase patrols to secure shipping lanes, but each additional deployment introduces further complexity. If additional vessels are struck, pressure could mount for expanded maritime protection missions. The economic impact of conflict frequently extends beyond the battlefield. As long as uncertainty surrounds the strait's security, markets are likely to remain volatile. The intersection of military escalation and energy infrastructure places the global economy on alert, reinforcing that this confrontation carries consequences far beyond regional borders. The conflict now spans military, political, domestic, and economic fronts. 3 American service members have been killed, marking a decisive escalation. Iran's supreme leader and more than 40 senior officials were eliminated in a coordinated strike, triggering retaliation across at least 9 countries. Inside Iran, leadership transition is underway amid public unrest. The president signals operations could last weeks while leaving the door open to talks. A deadly shooting in Austin raises domestic security concerns. Congress debates war powers authority, and threats to the Strait of Hormuz are already shaking global energy markets. The trajectory of this crisis will depend on military decisions, diplomatic channels, and political accountability in the days ahead. How should the United States balance military force and diplomacy at this moment? Like, comment, and subscribe for continuing coverage and in-depth analysis.